Western countries, often perceived as champions of human rights and democratic values, frequently find themselves under scrutiny for their varying responses to global human rights violations. This inconsistency raises fundamental questions about their motivations and principles. Are these behaviors indicative of double standards, bias, or just hypocrisy? Western nations tend to prioritize human rights in countries where they have strategic interests, whether those be economic, geopolitical, or cultural. For instance, the United States and various European nations have been vocal about human rights abuses in Venezuela and Iran, largely due to concerns related to regional stability, national security, and implications for energy resources. In contrast, similar or worse abuses in countries like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, where significant economic ties and military contrasts exist, are often underplayed or glossed over. This selective approach reflects a broader pattern where interventions seem driven not by a sincere commitment to human rights, but rather by a complex calculus of national interests. Historical context complicates this dynamic further. Former colonial powers may exhibit leniency towards regimes that maintain favorable trade relations or geopolitical alliances despite committing egregious human rights violations. For example, the UK and France have historically supported autocratic regimes in the Middle East, often prioritizing stability and economic relationships over advocacy for democracy and human rights. The reluctance to confront these nations, critics say, often stems from fears of jeopardizing lucrative trade agreements and strategic partnerships. For instance, Western criticisms of human rights abuses in Hong Kong and the treatment of Uyghurs in China have not led to substantial sanctions or interventions that could threaten economic ties. The role of Western media is crucial in shaping public perceptions of human rights issues. Some crises receive extensive media coverage, drawing international outrage and prompting governmental responses, while others languish in obscurity. The Syrian civil war, for example, ignited a flurry of media attention that led to various forms of intervention and support for opposition groups. In contrast,
no solution can be reached with terror except by striking it with an iron fist. I don't think that any sane human being would think that terrorism can be dealt with via politics. This opposition is not reliable. It's a failure at the popular and moral levels, and it has no role in solving the crisis.
Both because it will help in the defeat of Daesh and because it would enable millions of Syrians who have been forced to flee to do what every refugee dreams of. They just want to be able to go home. Now,
ongoing atrocities in places like Myanmar, where the Rohingya crisis continues unabated, struggle to garner sustained attention from both media and governments. Similarly, the plight of Uyghurs in Xinjiang region, although receiving some coverage, has not resulted in significant direct action from Western governments, partly due to the economic implications of challenging China. This selective approach creates an erosion of credibility for Western nations as advocates for human rights. When condemnation appears cherry-picked, it diminishes the moral authority these countries assert on the global stage. Nations witnessing this inconsistency may feel less compelled to adhere to international human rights norms. Autocratic regimes can exploit these biases by framing Western criticisms as neo-colonialist or hypocritical, effectively deterring genuine reforms efforts and stifling dissent. Julie Gichuru, president of African Leadership and Dialogue Initiative, means no words in expressing these biases by Western countries.
We will fly into Libya and we can have some kind of diplomatic conversations. The feedback from external actors to them was, if you fly into Libyan airspace, we cannot guarantee your security. I want you to think about that for a minute, that heads of state of the African continent were told this on our continent. And ladies and gentlemen, what is Libya today? What is Libya today? And it happened on our watch. It happened on our watch. Ladies and gentlemen, Rwanda 1994. Dilly-dallying over the word genocide at the United Nations Security Council saw 1 million people dead in how many days? And who solved the problem? We had to solve the problem. His Excellency and a small force came back in and had to build this country from scratch, ladies and gentlemen. And today we still get lectures and hear lectures about human rights, and there's something wrong. I want to talk about South Africa today. In South Africa today, we are hearing narratives being built around white genocide in South Africa. You are security actors, you understand the import of these narratives and why are they being placed in the international scene? Why is this happening? What could it open up? Gaza today, ladies and gentlemen, where we've seen the brutalization and the massacre of tens of thousands of children. The multilateral systems, I'm going to come to each of you and ask, are they working? Can they hold? And if they cannot hold, and Africa has never been given an adequate seat at the table, Martin, you can talk about that, perhaps I'm wrong, you can correct me. But where does Africa stand? 54 nations? A strong continent, resource-rich, fastest-growing continent in the world. Where do we deserve to sit?
While Western countries often advocate for human rights in nations such as Afghanistan, Libya, and across the broader Middle East, they have also failed to act in key contests. For example, despite documented human rights abuses in Egypt, under President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, the U.S. provides substantial military aid, prioritizing geopolitical stability over human rights concerns. Similarly, in various African nations like Ethiopia and Cameroon, the West has been slow to respond to significant human rights violations, often due to complex local dynamics or strategic considerations. Moreover, the arms sales to countries with dubious human rights records such as Saudi Arabia, which have been engaged in devastating conflict in Yemen, highlight the contradictions in Western policies. While some Western countries openly advocate for human rights in Yemen, they simultaneously support the Saudi-led coalition with arms and military aid. As nations in Global South increasingly assert their influence, they challenge Western narratives against a backdrop of perceived hypocrisy. Countries such as Brazil and South Africa adopt positions that counterbalance Western narratives advocating for a more equitable global human rights discourse. Institutions like the United Nations often struggle under the weight of these biases. Political dynamics within the Security Council can stifle robust action in response to human rights violations based more on national interest than on humanitarian considerations. MediaWire's analysis of Western responses to human rights violations reveals a complex web of interests, biases, and systematic inconsistencies. While many Western nations project an image of ethical superiority, their actions frequently betray an opportunistic prioritization of interest over principles. This raises pressing questions about terminology. Should the behaviors of these Western countries be characterized as double standards, bias, or outright hypocrisy? The answer likely resides in a combination of these terms, reflecting a tangled interplay of moral dilemmas and geopolitical calculations. A more consistent and principled approach to human rights is essential for fostering genuine global progress, for maintaining the credibility of democratic values.